Dear students, warm greetings of the day. In the last session, we learned about the childhood of Stephen Hawking, his parents, the importance that his parents gave to education, his early schooling, his campus life at Oxford, and also how he got admission to do a PhD at Cambridge. All these things were discussed in the last session. In this session, we are going to deal with some of the problems faced by Stephen Hawking and how he tried to overcome all these problems in his life to become one of the brightest stars in the field of physics, in the field of science. Now I shall go through the next paragraph in the profile. Please listen to this reading. His first year at Cambridge was worse than that at Oxford. His slipshod mathematical background caught up with him, and he found general relativity extremely tough. Another far more disastrous problem arose then. During his third year at Oxford, Hawking started getting clumsy. He had fallen once or twice for no apparent reason. The following autumn at Cambridge, he had trouble tying his shoes, and sometimes he had difficulty talking. In his first year at Oxford, he felt lonely and bored. But his first year at Cambridge was worse than his first year at Oxford. It was more unpleasant. His slipshod mathematical background caught up with him. What do you mean by the expression slipshod? Slipshod means marked by great carelessness. His careless mathematical background caught up with him. What was the reason for that careless mathematical background? To get admission to Oxford, he had to prepare for an entrance examination, and he prepared physics, chemistry, and a little mathematics. He got admission there, and Oxford or the University College at Oxford did not offer mathematics. So he did not study mathematics at Oxford. So he had no sound base in mathematics, and this careless mathematical background caught up with him. To catch up is a phrasal verb which means he had to do something that he didn't have time to do earlier. Earlier he did not study mathematics at Oxford, and that made him worked hard to learn mathematics. So his slipshod mathematical background caught up with him. Another problem was that he found the theory of general relativity very tough. Most of the science students know what that theory of general relativity is. It is a theory propounded by the famous physicist Albert Einstein. He found that theory very tough. Another disastrous problem arose then. In his third year at Oxford, he had certain problems. He was getting clumsy. That means his movements became awkward. He lacked grace in his movements, and for no apparent reason, for no clear or specific reason, he had fallen once or twice when he was at Oxford. In the following autumn, in Cambridge, he experienced some other serious problems. He had a problem in tying his shoes, and also he found it difficult to speak. This paragraph clearly speaks about some of the problems, the initial problems that he faced when he was at Cambridge. Now I shall go through the next paragraph. Listen to this reading. Shortly after his 21st birthday in 1963, Hawking contracted a rare disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, for which there was no known cure. It caused a gradual disintegration of the nerve cells in the spinal cord and the brain. At first, he went into deep depression. He did not know what he ought to do or what his future would be like. Shortly after his 21st birthday in 1963, he contracted a rare disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or ALS, for which there was no known cure. He contracted that disease when he was just 21. What do you mean by the expression contract here? Contract means to catch a disease, particularly a disease which is serious. We use the expression to catch a cold, but we use the expression to contract a communicable disease like malaria, a disease which is more serious. So he contracted that disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a motor neuron disease. It's a very serious disease. It causes the disintegration or degeneration of nerve cells in the spinal cord and the brain. And the problem is that these nerve cells control the movement of a person, and a person will lose his control over his body movements. A person who contracts ALS or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis will die within a few years. When he knew about this particular disease, he was absolutely in a dejected state. He was in a state of despair. He did not know what he should do or what his future would be like. Now we move on to the next paragraph. My dreams at that time were rather confused, he admitted. Before my condition was diagnosed, I had been very bored with life. There did not seem to be anything worth doing. But shortly after I came out of hospital, I dreamt that I was going to be executed. I suddenly realized that there were a lot of worthwhile things to do if I were reprieved. Another recurring dream was the idea of sacrificing my life to save others. After all, if I were going to die, I might as well do some good. Stephen Hawking said that at that time his dreams were rather confused. Before the disease was diagnosed. What do you mean by the expression diagnosed? Diagnosed means identified a disease by examining the symptoms. Before his disease was diagnosed by the doctors, he had been bored with his life. After he came out of the hospital, he had so many frightening dreams. He dreamt that he was going to be executed. He was going to be killed. And he thought if he had got a reprieve, he could do so many worthwhile things in his life. What do you mean by a reprieve? Reprieve means to grant a stay of execution. Most of you have heard about the death row convicts appealing for a reprieve, for granting a stay of their execution, appealing to the Supreme Court, appealing to the President of India, appealing even to the International Court of Justice to grant them a stay of execution. So here he said that if he had got a reprieve, he could have done so many worthwhile things in his life. He had another recurring dream, something that comes to the mind again and again. He had a recurring dream. What was that recurring dream? He dreamt that he was going to sacrifice his life to save others. So, if he had got a reprieve, he would definitely do something good for others, something worthwhile for others. Now, I shall go through the next few paragraphs in the profile. Listen to this reading. Hawking's doctors hoped that his condition would stabilize, but the disease aggravated rapidly. They soon informed him that he had only about 2 more years to live. 2 years passed. The progression of the disease had slowed. I didn't die. In fact, although there was a cloud hanging over my future, I found to my surprise that I was enjoying life in the present more than before. Total disability and death, though still a not too distant certainty, were postponed. Hawking had his reprieve, a precarious and temporary one, but life was precious. Hawking's doctors hoped that his condition would become stable, but actually his condition aggravated. His condition became very serious, his condition became worse. Doctors informed him that he would get only 2 more years to live. But after some time, the progression of the disease slowed. The development of the disease slowed. Hawking had got a reprieve. In fact, there was a cloud hanging over his future. He started enjoying his life more than before. Total disability and death, though still a not too distant certainty, were postponed, were deferred, were put off for a later period. Hawking got his reprieve, even though it was a precarious and temporary one. But life was precious. So the reprieve was a precarious one. It was a temporary one. Precarious means uncertain or dangerous. It was an uncertain reprieve. It was a temporary reprieve, but life was precious. Now I will go through the next few paragraphs in the chapter Quest for a Theory of Everything by Kitty Gale Ferguson. At a New Year's party at St. Albans, just before he entered the hospital for tests, Hawking met Jane Wilde. To her, this disheveled graduate student seemed terribly intelligent, eccentric, and rather arrogant. But he was interesting and she liked his wit. When Jane met him again after his discharge from the hospital, he was really in a pathetic state. I think he has lost his will to live. He was very confused, she commented. She was not, however, put off by his physical or mental condition. She was rather a shy teenager, serious-minded, with a strong faith in God, ingrained from childhood by her mother, and a belief that good can come out of any adversity. Hawking admired her optimism and the friendship developed slowly. After a while, the two began to realize in Jane's words that together we could make something worthwhile. For Stephen, that made all the difference. He applied for a research fellowship at KOTTIYOOR, one of the colleges in Cambridge University. In 1965, at the age of 23, Hawking received his fellowship at KOTTIYOOR, and in July of the same year, Jane and he were married. At a New Year's party at St. Albans, just before he entered the hospital for tests, he met a young teenager, a young girl, Jane Wilde. For her, this disheveled graduate student was terribly intelligent, arrogant, and eccentric. She found this young graduate student as a disheveled young man. Disheveled. What do you mean by the expression disheveled? Disheveled means untidy, messy, disarranged, or disordered. She found this young student a disordered, disarranged person. He was eccentric, he was strange, and at the same time arrogant. Arrogant means self-important. So she found him terribly intelligent, eccentric, and arrogant. He was very interesting, and Jane Wilde liked his wit. When Jane Wilde met him after his discharge from the hospital, he was in a totally dejected state. He was in a state of despair and he didn't have any will to live. He was very confused, but she was not put off by the physical or mental condition of Stephen Hawking. She was a shy teenager, but serious-minded and had strong faith in God. She had strong faith in God, which was established in her mind from childhood by her mother. And she always believed that only good would come out of any adversity. And Stephen Hawking admired her optimism. He admired her robust optimism. Their friendship developed gradually, and in Jane's words, together they could make something worthwhile. And for Stephen Hawking, that made all the difference. He applied for a research fellowship at KU's, one of the colleges in Cambridge. In 1965, at the age of 23, he received his fellowship at Cambridge, and of July in the same year, he married Jane Wilde. Now we move on to the next paragraph in the chapter Quest for a Theory of Everything by Kitty Gale Ferguson. People who remember Hawking in the university in the late 1960s recall him making his way around the corridors with a cane, supporting himself against the wall. He spoke with what sounded like a slight speech impediment, but more than that, they remember his brashness in sessions involving some of the world's most distinguished scientists. While other young researchers kept a reverential silence, Hawking daringly asked unexpected and penetrating questions. He clearly knew what he was talking about. His reputation as a genius, another Einstein, began then. People who remember Hawking's in the university in the 1960s, they recall how this man walked along the corridors of this university with a cane in his hand and supporting himself against the wall. He talked with a slight speech impediment, with a slight speech disability or difficulty. He spoke with a slight obstacle. More than that, people remember the brashness of this young man in sessions which were attended by world's eminent scientists and distinguished personalities. People still remember about his brashness. Brashness means behavior that shows a lot of confidence and no respect. He showed a lot of confidence in those sessions, and he didn't show much respect to those eminent personalities. Most of the research fellows sat there in reverential silence, in a respectful silence, but he was daring enough. He was courageous enough to ask unexpected and penetrating questions to those eminent scientists and distinguished personalities assembled in those sessions. His reputation as a genius, another Einstein, began then. And now he is widely hailed as the second Einstein. In the next session, we will discuss the last part of the profile Quest for a Theory of Everything by Kitty Gale Ferguson. You have to prepare an assignment. This is that assignment. Behind the success of every man is a woman. How far is this statement true in the light of your reading of the personality of Jane Wilde in this profile? Prepare this assignment, go through the text carefully, try to understand the problems that he faced in his life and how he overcame all those problems in his life to become one of the greatest scientists that the world has ever known. That's all for the day. Thank you.